Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Word Alive broadcast. I'm your host, Mike Dobbs. Hope you're enjoying our broadcast. We certainly are enjoying teaching them, and we appreciate everyone that tunes into our broadcast on a regular basis. I guess you noticed that the backdrop's a little different. We're excited to announce that we are working on a new studio, and we'll be into that studio hopefully in the next few weeks. And so now I'm in my office in the transition period. And so we are apologize for the busy background, but we do appreciate you tuning in and they see what my office looks like. And anyway, we're going back to Genesis, the 3rd chapter, and we were in the last verse of Genesis 3, talking about the curse and when God was cursing the ground, cursing Adam, cursing Eve, that she would have children in travail and pain, and also cursing the serpent, that he would crawl on his belly. Someone sent me, that had been watching the broadcast, sent me a little bit of information on that they said they actually, some Indian scientists had actually found proof that that serpents did have hind legs at one time. And they are working on the research of that. But anyway, they sent me that interesting piece, and I appreciate a watcher doing that, and so we could go and investigate it, and it was pretty interesting. Thank you so much. And so we see at the last part that God drives them from the garden, and as we've said before, we'll say one more time, God did not drive Adam and Eve from the garden because he was angry. God doesn't respond in anger. In fact, one time I said, God, please don't be angry at me about something that I had done. And the Lord just spoke to my heart and said, look, it took me 430 years to get angry at Israel for all of the things they did before I brought judgment upon them. So, in that respect, I guess it does take God a long time to get angry. And it's because his emotions don't swing from day to day. He is perfect in his state that he's in. And so there's no reason for him to change to some other emotion. And so he moves and makes his decisions according to his plan and according to his wisdom and not according to his emotions. And that's why God is fair in all things. And so God is not angry at Adam and Eve because they have sinned. He's disappointed, but more so for them, because now he is not going to be able to have the relationship with them that he's always wanted. And they're not going to live forever in their physical being anymore. They're not eternal creatures. They are going to die. And so there's a lot that's changed. The animals are not going to be herbivorous anymore, where they will not be predators, but now the animals will be wild. They will not be under Adam's subjection anymore because he is not the king of the earth anymore. And so they are wild, and they'll be predators and they'll be prey. And a lot of things have changed that is unfortunate. And so God is disappointed, obviously, but he doesn't drive them out of the garden because he's angry. He drives them from the garden simply because he does not want them to eat of the tree of life, because if they do, they would be eternal sinners. Death would not be a thing that would be possible. Therefore, Jesus could not robe himself in flesh as God Almighty and come and dwell among us and die for our sin, and therefore we could not be redeemed. And so that is the whole reason why he drives them from the garden. And the Bible says that he drove them and placed at the east of the garden. Now, we've already discussed that the Garden of Eden must have been a walled garden, a very large garden, could have covered 1/3 of the earth, but it was a very large garden, and there's an entrance. And so the entrance is at the east, and that's where he puts the cherub with a flaming sword to prevent them from being able to come in and eat of the tree and transgress. And of course, he doesn't trust them, and that's why he drove them out. The word there really drove is expelled. He expelled Adam from the garden and Eve, and he placed them in the east, and he put cherubims there with the flaming sword. Now, here's our key words for this verse as we wrap up the 3rd chapter of Genesis. And the first word, of course, is cherub, which is the Hebrew word for cherubim, and it basically means an unearthly being who is directly responsible and attends to God. So it is a high form of angelic being, and the angelic being is a guard, and he's given a flaming sword. He may be a warrior angel, and he is protecting the entrance to keep man from being able to come back in. And the word says a flaming sword. The word there in the Hebrew is lahat. That's kind of funny, lahat. But anyway, that is the word. And it means to blaze, or the idea of being enwrapped in a flame or enchanted with a flame is kind of the Hebrew understanding. So when a flaming sword, we're talking about a sword that literally is enwrapped with fire. And it is a supernatural fire to prevent man from coming. It would be a fearful sight. And so it would prevent him from being willing to take the chance to come into the garden. And then the word sword there, we will see it many, many times in the Bible. And of course, in the Hebrew, the word there is kereb, and it means a cutting instrument or a sharp implement. Sometimes it can be translated as an axe or a dagger or a mattock or a sword, or even a sharp tool. So he gives him a sharp tool or a sharp sword. It is enwrapped in fire, and this mighty angel is standing at the gate saying, "You cannot enter," to prevent them from coming in. And another interesting thing is said that it turned in every way to keep the way of the tree of life. So we understand that is the reason for this angel. He turned in every way, guarding. You can see him as he's alert, looking in every direction to make sure that no one is approaching. And the word there is halfak, which means to turn around or to change or to overturn or to turn about, as in rotating. And so you've got this angel, mighty angel, flaming sword, turning in every direction to make sure no one can approach the tree of life and enter into the garden again. So Adam and Eve are now living outside of the garden, which is a completely new existence. They've never dreamed they'd ever have this kind of existence, and they really don't know how to really make it outside of the garden. Now, at this point, there is some speculation, and I'll always differentiate between speculation and revelation. Revelation is when you have scripture to prove it. Speculation is when you're just doing that. You're speculating. And there are some that say that God sent special angels called the Watchers. Now, we do see Daniel mention the Watchers in the 10th chapter of Daniel. And so there's a couple places where the Watchers are mentioned. And they would have been angels that would have physical-looking bodies. They would be supernatural creatures, but their bodies would look physical, and they would look like men. They would appear to be humans, maybe a little larger than humans, and they would be there for the express reason to teach man how to plant a garden, how to grow food, how to live off the land, how to prepare food, and everything else that he would need to know to be able to make it outside of the garden. Now, we don't really have biblical stance for the fact that God sent them, or if that is the reason for them, except for an extra biblical book called the Book of Enoch. I will never equate the Book of Enoch with the Bible. I will never equate any book with the Bible. But it is, there are several versions, and you have to be careful about the Book of Enoch because several versions are corrupted and really have been made to be more satanic and occultic. But the original translation of the Book of Enoch is safe enough by the rabbis to read and believe, and many of the rabbis embrace the Book of Enoch as being an extra biblical book. And again, the rabbinical writings are extra biblical, and none of that is equated to the Bible. And so I'm not going to refer to them as revelation, but they do mention the Watchers, name the Watchers in the Book of Enoch and such as that. So that could be where the speculation comes from. And again, if you decide to read the Book of Enoch, be very careful that you get the right version because there are several. And the one that I have read was written and translated by Richard Laurent, and it is supposedly the original form of the Book of Enoch. So in this story, we see them expelled from the garden. They have to learn how to plant. They have to learn, whether by assistance of the angels or whatever. Later, these angels are the ones that would see the daughters of men as being beautiful and take them as wives and create an entire different creature, which is part human and part supernatural. And God is very displeased with that. They're called the Nephilim. They're called giants. And this is where that comes from, the sons of God being the Watchers that were sent. Now, if that is true, we don't know. That's speculation. So I'm going to say that. I'm not going to say that's revelation. But they have to learn how to to be able to live outside the garden. And in chapter 4, it opens up, we're going back to the scripture now because it's safer there, but in chapter 4, it opens up as Adam knowing his wife, and the word know there is to come into intimate contact or to intimately know his wife, and she conceives and she brings forth Cain. And she names him Cain because the word there, Cain, means an acquired possession. And the reason that she names him Cain is because she said, I have received a man-child from the Lord. And so in the King James Version, it says, I've gotten a man from the Lord. In the Exegesis Bible, it says that Eve conceived and bare forth Cain, and she said, I have gotten or chatteled a man from the Lord, which means I have acquired him or he has been given to me. The word there, new, is yada, and it means to know or to acknowledge or to make acquaintance, be aware, become intimate with. So this is the first time that we see intimate relationship between man and woman, and of course it brings forth, and that is what God intended it to do. And they are fulfilling the commandment when God said, subdue the earth, which you can't do anymore because he's not the king of the earth anymore, but to subdue the earth, but he's also now telling him to multiply and replenish the earth. Now the word Eve is kavah, and we talked about this a little bit in the last broadcast. It means life giver, and she's not named Eve until after the curse. It is after Adam has received the curse from God that he calls her Eve. Before that, she's woman because she's of the man. Now she's Eve, which means life giver or mother of all living. And we see that really is not true. She's not the mother or the source of all living because God created all things. So now because Adam does not have a spiritual understanding, he's kind of turning toward goddess worship, which that is what it will become later. And he is giving and attributing all of that has been created and all that is made and all life to his wife, Eve. And we understand that is the beginning of idolatry. The word conceived is haral, and it means to become pregnant or conceive or to be with child. So when you conceive, you are with child. And that is the biblical stance against abortion. Is, people say, well, is it really a baby whenever you conceive? Well, I think we can go to the highest form of understanding, and that is directly from God, and that would be from his word. And the word hara means that you are pregnant, which means you have conceived, which means you are with child. You have a child inside of you at the moment of conception. That's the biblical stand on that, and that's why abortion is murder. And then Cain. She names him Cain because he's the acquired possession. And in the Aramaic, he's Cain, and Cain is the father of the Kenites, which we'll talk about later when we're talking about the history of mankind. And the word Cain means a dirge. It means a lament, as lamenting for someone that is dead or a funeral rite. And it's accompanied with beating the breast or, like this, or playing music on drums or whatever the ancient man did during funeral as in a form of sorrow and expressing sorrow. And Cain later became known as a blacksmith. And so when you look at the blacksmith, when you look at working with metal, the nature of Cain is reflected in his name because Cain became the man that the only way you could deal with him is to severely melt him down and mold him into something. And you'll understand more about what I'm talking about when we talk about him and Abel. Verse 2, and she again bare his brother Abel. So because of these two verses occurring side by side, many people equate that Adam had twins and that Cain and Abel were twins. And that's possible. But it doesn't say that they were born at the same time. It just says that she again bare, which actually could mean that she actually became pregnant again and had a child. So it's kind of hard to say for sure whether they really were twins. And Abel is a keeper of the sheep, but Cain is a tiller of the ground. Now, there's something here we need to see right off the bat, and that is that Cain is a tiller of the ground. He's a farmer, and there's certainly nothing wrong with farming because that provides the food that we need. However, God must have somehow instructed Adam that he was to offer a blood sacrifice for his sins. So substitutionary sacrifice is already put in place long before the Old Testament, long before the tabernacle. And we'll understand that when we see the next verses that we'll study here, is that Cain is a tiller of the ground, so he is raising vegetables. But God says that unless there's the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. And he's instructed Adam to offer a sacrifice for sin by the shedding of blood. So Cain would have to borrow or purchase an animal from Abel in order to make the right sacrifice and to offer his first fruits to God as a sin sacrifice. Now, offering his vegetables to God as a first fruit sacrifice would be acceptable, but offering them as a sin sacrifice, a fellowship sacrifice, would not be. And so it makes it clear here in the second verse, Abel becomes a keeper of the sheep. He becomes the shepherd, and Cain becomes the tiller of the ground. And neither one of those occupations are wrong. It's just that Abel is going to be able to offer a sacrifice of blood because he's raising animals, where Cain, in order for him to be obedient, would have to acquire an animal from Abel in order to offer a sacrifice. And we're going to see very quickly that Cain is too proud to do that. And that is why he offers God an offering of vegetables, and God does not receive it because it does not meet his pre-required recommendations for sacrifice. God is not showing favoritism on Abel above Cain. That's not what's happening here. It's that Cain is so proud, and we understand that the basis of all sin is pride. Whenever we sin, we are simply just exercising our pride. We're saying basically, God, it doesn't matter what your word says. We're going to do what we want to do because we want to do it. And so pride says, my opinion and what I want to do is more important than your opinion or your word or your instruction. And so the basis of all sin is pride. Honestly, Lucifer fell to pride before he fell to sin because he wanted to be like the Most High. And so pride is the basis of all sin. It's when you put the I in the middle and everything else surrounds it. And so that's the problem here with Cain. Cain does not want to take a sacrifice from Abel and offer it for his sin. So he's saying, well, I'm just going to give God what I do, and if he doesn't like it, he can get over it. And that's basically what we see here. And then the thing about Abel, his word is Hebel. That's the Hebrew word, Hebel. And it means emptiness or vanity. It means a vapor of smoke, something that's transitory or temporary. So Eve names Cain, Cain, and Abel, Abel. And we don't know whether they're twins or not, but they're certainly very close in age. And the older one, which is Cain, is not going to condescend to get an animal from Abel to offer as a sacrifice for his sin. He's just going to offer his vegetables because this is what I worked hard to do, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is my opinion, and I'm going to do it the way I want to, and God's going to just have to accept it. That kind of attitude certainly doesn't go very far with God, and it's not very healthy for a relationship. We must comply to the word. We must comply to instruction. And if we don't, sin comes. It just happens. And this is the prime example of what we see. So Cain has the nature, he's hard. And the only way God can deal with Cain, and unfortunately even his descendants, is by force, by severity and such as that. With Abel means a vapor of smoke. He's very malleable, he's very flexible, he's very sensitive, and he's a worshiper. He represents the spirit man, where Cain represents the flesh. So we see our first paradigm here, this change that's taking place, and we see this from them being driven from the garden to trying to live life outside the garden, that now there is a potential for something very terrible called sin. And although Adam and Eve sinned, we can prove to you that sin passed to the next generation, because now we have Abel and Cain, and now we're going to see Cain sin, and he's going to commit the first murder. And it is not a It is not a murder of, it could have been predetermined, but it also could have been a murder of rage or a murder of the moment. We don't know for sure. In verse 3, it says, "In the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord." Now we could say, "Cain, we commend you that you're willing to give an offering to God." But you see, the only problem is that obedience is better than sacrifice. That's a principle that's in the book. And so you can obey, but if you're not but you have to do it according to the will of the Lord, or it's not obedience. You can offer a sacrifice, but if it's not according to the word of the Lord, it's not an acceptable sacrifice. And so God is trying to be patient with Cain and his pride and his hard attitude. And Abel raises his cattle and he gets a lamb and he offers a sacrifice. So it must be a special day that everybody is offering their sacrifices for sin. It must have been the Yom Kippur of his time. And so, we read here that Cain offers his vegetables on the altar and burns them to the Lord. And we don't know how God shows that he accepted the sacrifice, but he doesn't. And then, Abel offers the blood sacrifice and God accepts it. And the word offering here is minkau, and the word actually means to apportion or bestow a donation or a tribute or a sacrificial offering that could be either bloodless and voluntary, or it could be a blood offering for sin. And that is the key word that we see there. So the nature of Cain is hard, and he's going to do it his way. The nature of Abel is like a vapor. He's going to be obedient, he's compliant, he's going to do as what he needs to do. And that is the nature of our flesh and our spirit. Our fleshly nature wants to do it our way, wants to run our life, wants to be what we want to be, wants to do what we want to do. And the Bible calls that iniquity. When we live by our own will, that is iniquity. And that was Cain. That's what he was doing. He was offering his own sacrifice the way he wanted to. Abel, on the other hand, represents the spirit man who is sensitive, surrendered. He is the shepherd. He has the compassion, and he is obedient and offers the sacrifice according to instruction. In verse 4, "And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof, according to the instruction that was given them, and the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering." Now, the word there, fat, is keleb, and it means the grease or the fatness of the animal, and it's considered the richest or the choice part. To the ancient people, fat was very valuable because if you were going into the wintertime, it would be good to eat a high-fat diet so that you would be able to keep warm. But also, fat would be used to cook with. It'd be used for tallow, for candles. Fat was very, very valuable. And so he offers the fat to God as well as the sacrifice. And this must be the way God told them to do it. This must be the way Adam taught his boys to offer a sacrifice. And not because he's able, but because he's obedient, God gives respect to it. And the word respect there is sha'ah, and it means to gaze at or to inspect or consider valuable or to regard in a very high manner. But in verse 5, "But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." So somehow he understood that his sacrifice was not accepted. And we're going to see, unfortunately, what happens when Cain takes matters in his own hands. His pride gets out of the way and brings him into sin, even after God warns him. And so you know what? Things just haven't changed because we still deal with that same battle every day. Well, I appreciate you watching, and I hope that you have learned something today. We're doing everything we can to make the Word come alive to you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Word Alive broadcast. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. Once you've subscribed, make sure to click on the notification bell so that you'll be notified each time a new episode is released. If you'd like to support this ministry, you can do so by checking out our Patreon page and signing up for one of the provided monthly tiers. A link to our Patreon page can be found down in the description. God bless you, and we'll see you next time as we continue to make the Word come alive to you.